Hello, everyone. Welcome back to CybHER Conversations. It's been a while since we recorded, but today we have a very special guest. Jessica Hyde is joining us today. Jessica has a dynamic background spanning multiple sectors, including government, commercial, and academia. And she has a unique blend of real-world experience that she brings to digital forensics. She has experience with mobile forensics, iOS, Android analysis, IoT forensics, and Chromebook forensics. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is now yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Kanti. It's such a pleasure to be here and such a pleasure to be here with all of you who are joining us. Um, I'm really excited to share little bit about digital forensics and kind of how I got here with everyone. So thank you so much for that opportunity. Can you see my screen? Excellent, excellent. So, hi, I'm Jessica Hyde. I currently actually own my own digital forensics firm. We do research, we do training, so we train government agencies on how to do digital forensics as well as the public. We also do deep research. We hack into phones to get data. And in addition to doing that work, I'm also a adjunct professor at George Mason University, where I teach mobile device forensics in their uh, digital forensics master's program. Before doing my current things, I actually worked in a variety of different places, as Kanti mentioned, including as a United States Marine, including as a government contractor, but also working for one of the big four, the big auditing firms. I worked for Ernst & Young doing digital forensics on a variety of different corporate areas. And in addition, I'm a really big volunteer in the community. So I work on two standards bodies, as well as working with the High Tech Crime Investigation Association at the international level, and with a project to review work that's done by other practitioners so we can share it. But I was young once too. So this is actually my senior year high school picture, and just showing that whatever and wherever you are today, that you'll be different. And I thought it's nice to share with you who I used to be. And, you know, your experiences in the world will shape you. What you all have experienced in the world is very different than what I've experienced. And the things that you've gone through as a generation is going to help mold where you go. Obviously, COVID being a big shaper. For me and my generation, it was September 11th. And right after that US terrorist attack, I decided I needed to give back a little more. And I actually joined the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps told me that I had the right kind of brains to fix jets. So I started fixing Harriers, these aircraft that take off vertically. It was a really, really cool job. I actually got to meet both President Bushes while I was serving, and I learned how to troubleshoot all the electrical systems on aircraft. And I was soldering wires and fixing components and shooting wires with multimeters and pulling out schematics and figuring out how things work, which made me really realize I wanted to get into an engineering program, right? So how does that lead to digital forensics? I decided I wanted to become an electrical engineer. And so when I got out of the Marine Corps, I had an engineering degree and this experience doing wire repair and schematic analysis, but it was still during the height of those operations. So I actually went and started working for what's called the Terrorist Explosive Device Analytical Center, or TDAC. And what I did was reverse engineered improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. So most of the IEDs that were being used in the war at the time were actually connected to mobile phones. And so I would get the remnants of the bombs that had gone off that were parts of phones and parts of homemade circuit boards and figure out how they worked so that we could make countermeasures and protect people's lives, but also what data was there so we could figure out how the terrorists were communicating. And so I started doing mobile forensics on devices that were blown up and taking those pieces and using all those skills I had from learning electrical engineering to figure out how to get the data off of the bits of chips I had left and then how to reconstruct it so we could save lives and prevent people from being harmed. So I took that information. I decided to go to graduate school. I went to George Mason. I worked a variety of places, including I spent 3 years working at the National Media Exploitation Center, which was an absolute career highlight because we got to do the impossible. Whatever the 22 government agencies we supported couldn't figure out that came from a mobile phone or an IoT device got sent to us. And the reason we could do anything was because we mentally had it in our minds that we could do anything. And any of you can do the same. You can do anything as long as you think that the possibilities are limitless. So I spent most of my time doing things that had never been done before, figuring out how to get data off of Alexa from Amazon, figuring out how to get data off of smartwatches and different phones that had never been seen before, and how to deal with it. So what is this digital forensics thing I'm talking about? I was honored. I was a guest on a podcast from Abby Hornacek, Getting Schooled. She interviews all these different professions, and she asked me, what is digital forensics? And I think the biggest key I gave away from that was that people don't always realize that when you delete something, the only person you're hiding it from is yourself. Like when you're using your phone, and Kathy, this goes for you too, when you're using your phone and you delete a picture, you're just hiding it from your view. The data and the bytes are still on the device. Some of them may be in the cloud, some of them may be encrypted, some of them may, after some period of time, get rewritten over. But we as the user, when we hit delete, we don't actually control them. So we recover data. So let's say you're using a popular application like Snapchat. Snapchat photos are often recovered. Even if you as the user thought because of the time to live, how long the picture showed for before it went away, it's actually still digitally there. So that's a lot of what we do as digital forensics examiners, is we look for that data. So a lot of times the field that I'm in is referred to as DFIR, sometimes DFIR, but it stands for Digital Forensics and Incident Response, which are actually two different things. So what is this digital forensics thing? So digital forensics is the entire process of collecting, picking up the device, getting the data from it, analyzing it, and then reporting whatever's in electronic evidence. So digital forensics, because of that term forensics, means it's for court, right? So I just got a summons yesterday to go testify on a report I wrote. That's part of what we do. So we do everything from seizing the device in some circumstances, figuring out how to get the data from it, storing it in a way that it is not mutable, can't be changed, so that we know that it's good for court. And then we analyze it. We dig deep. We figure out how the newest applications are storing data. We figure out how to get geolocations from your smartwatch or your phone. We test, we do a lot of research, and then we apply it to the case. Then we do writing. Writing is important. It's not all hacking. We write up the reports, and then we potentially, depending on the case, have to testify in court. So that's what we do in digital forensics. It's known by a couple of different names over the years. So if you hear high-tech crime or high technology crime, digital evidence, electronic evidence, those things imply digital forensics. What are the steps we go through? We protect. So we keep our devices from getting wiped, because people can send a wipe signal if we seize a device. So we protect it. Then we get the data off, and then we ensure the integrity. So we do what's called hashing so that we know that it doesn't change. Then we start to recover the artifacts, go through them, and analyze it. And all of this is like a standard forensic science. It's defined by NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology. Incident response on the other end, before I talk kind of about a case that I assisted on, incident response is more if a company has an issue where their computer is hacked, how we recover it, figure out who did it, and get the system up and running. So one is more about computer security, and one is more about digital forensics. But even in incident response, sometimes that involves cybercrime, and it may go to court. So we use the same tools and methods. So you want to hear about a case, Santi? Yeah? Okay. So I'll talk about Wisconsin versus George Birch, which it is a horrible case. We don't work pleasant things, unfortunately. That's the, I'd say, the negative side. But the work we do helps find truth and justice. So we are able to determine from data what that truth is, and that's really the crux of what we get to do. And our work exonerates the innocent, but it also helps find missing kids. It helps find truth, and it also helps figure out who did bad things. So unfortunately, Nicole van der Heijden, a 31-year-old mother, was found dead 3 miles from her home. And it was not a kind murder. There's no such thing as a kind murder. But her boyfriend, who lived with her, Dietrich, he was immediately the suspect. That is very typical. Dietrich said he didn't do it, and he actually had gone to sleep wearing a Fitbit. Fitbits, as you know, look at data. Now, Fitbits do record a number of minutes that you are asleep, but it's been found that that isn't admissible because it doesn't really tell when you're asleep. The goal isn't monitoring you from above and looking at you sleeping, right? The goal of it is to see if maybe your sleep's disturbed. But what it did do that was admissible was it checked his steps. And Dietrich had an interesting alibi. He did something we, or many of us do. He got up in the middle of the night to use the restroom. So when he got up in the middle of the night, and these are the actual timestamps from this case, he was wearing a Fitbit. So he had said, I was sleeping. I got up during the time of the murder, which was the middle of the night, and I actually went to the bathroom. So what did the police in this investigation do? They went and got the data both from his phone, but also requested it from the provider, from Fitbit. And that data actually said how many steps he had taken. That's pretty cool, right? So the examiners working the case actually reached out to me, and they asked me to look at it because I had done a lot of research that was public on Fitbit. So I'll show you some of the data that like a Fitbit can get and some of the tools we use here. So the Fitbit in this case actually checked the number of steps. And you can see in this sample data, what's really interesting is it records it in 15-minute intervals. So the phone checked it from 12:30 to 12:45 and said he took 212 steps. This actually isn't the data from the case. This is actually the data we created testing to try to replicate the scenario, which is what we do. And we were able to demonstrate that the phone had the data in 15-minute increments. The spreadsheet that Fitbit sent back, which wasn't raw data, was in minute increments. But the reason it was valuable is because those minute increments added up and matched the 15-minute intervals. So we had confirmation from the data that was in the cloud from Fitbit that they provided and the data that was on Dietrich's phone. And what's so great about it is these steps exonerated Dietrich. So we kept an innocent person from going to jail because for murder because of it. And if you ever want to watch the trial, Sergeant Richard Lapnow actually did this, and you can actually go and watch the trial on YouTube. Sometimes when we testify and when we do the work, so I didn't testify in this instance, but I helped them verify and understand the data. There was actually other evidence that put the person who did get sentenced for doing this, George Birch, at the scene, and they actually had Google dashboard data that showed that he was where the body had been found. It's really interesting because they originally only had Dietrich as a suspect. George Birch got in trouble for another crime. When those investigators were looking at his phone and at his phone history, they noted something irregular. He was doing a lot of searching to find out about news events related to this murder. He wanted to know what people knew since he had gotten away with it at that time. So that internet search history caused a further probe into his device, and that's how they found things he did. Interestingly enough, he went on appeal all the way up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court because he felt that that evidence shouldn't be used in court. And that's a large part of what we deal with is the law, because it wasn't from a search for that incident, it was from another crime. And the court actually said, no, even though it was from a different crime, it was shared between two police agencies, it is completely good, and his conviction was upheld. So I thought that'd be pretty neat. Just kind of see, kind of get a key into some of the kinds of things we get involved with. Conti,
This
did you
is
have any
pretty,
questions?
pretty cool.
I think so. I
Because
feel like I have the best job on earth.
and it helps if you have that, the mind that works that way, because not everybody is inclined towards, there are people that are very curious that I think would be such a good fit for work in open source intelligence and digital forensics. And I
Yes.
think it helps to have that kind of, you know,
I,
mind.
I couldn't agree more. The investigative mindset is the curious mind. I interview folks for roles in this field over my career. And one of the
Yeah,
key things I look for is people who tell me stories about how they, took apart their toys as kids just to see how they
yeah,
work, right? Or
yeah.
they love, their hobbies are solving puzzles. And it's something I ask people about is, well, what did you enjoy in childhood? And people sometimes have no idea why you're asking those questions because technical skill of knowing how to do things is one part, but you have to be curious to go that other step to be able to do the research involved and figure out how everything goes together.
Exactly. And I have a friend who actually is my other partner who helped create Cyber Conversations, Katie Shuck. She is the lead analyst for the South Dakota Fusion Center, and she has that extremely curious mind. She's very interested and she loves what she does, which I think is another great part, which I could absolutely tell from the way you were talking about the case.
Yes, yes. And what's cool about that case is I wasn't the investigator on that case, right? I had a really, really small part in just sharing how that data worked. But the the awesome thing that we get to do is see that our work actually has an impact on cases, and sometimes
Yeah,
when we figure out something it helps multiple different cases, right? So Fitbit is analyzed all over the place. In 2018 I started doing some research on Google Chromebooks, and then COVID happened in 2020, and I had
yeah.
figured out a lot of ways to deal with that data that then became more helpful. So sometimes just our curiosity of how does that work and how would I deal with that if I had it on an investigation prepares us for the next thing.
Exactly. That was a great slide deck that you had,
Oh, thank
which I think kind of leads into my questions again. I'm pretty sure most people by now um can't remember anything beyond the case that you talked about. So I want to go back and ask, what inspired you to pursue digital forensics and what do you find the most rewarding about this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, what inspired me to really dig into digital forensics is when I was given the opportunity to be able to use my mind to solve puzzles that could better people's lives. Because those are two things. I get a lot of self fulfillment from using my brain power to do some good and knowing that the results of my work help make the world safer, help kids be safe, help find justice, just that truth can have such an impact, keep innocent folks from going to jail, etc. Just being able to do good with your brain. It's like we get to do the ultimate thing of make the world a little bit better
Yeah,
using our things that we enjoy. And if you like puzzle solving and you also have that passion to find truth to make the world a little bit safer and better, digital forensics is right up your alley. And that's kind of how it felt for me.
that's perfect. And you mentioned, right, you have this background in avionics, you have this background in electrical engineering. Do you find that your background in both those fields contributes to your transition into forensics?
Yes, but it's not like the only path. So, this is the interesting thing. One of the most important things in solving complex problems is to have different perspectives. So my favorite teams that I've ever worked on have folks who come from different perspectives. So when I started in the field, there weren't digital forensics programs. Now there are digital forensics programs at many different universities. So I've worked with folks, and I have folks on my team who studied digital forensics. But I also have folks on my team who are prior law enforcement. I have folks on my team who are computer scientists, right, who studied computer engineering. I have folks on my team who are software developers. And all of those different experiences, coming from electronics engineering, coming from computer science, coming from straight up law enforcement, coming from being taught about digital forensics as the primary way you got into the field, when you take a team that has all those different perspectives and you're handed a hard problem, we'll all look at different ways to attack it. Do we go ahead and try to solder wires to that device to try to communicate it to it? Do we inject code to try to communicate with it? Do we ask the witness more questions to try to get dictionary attacks that we can put against that device? And all of us, with all of our different perspectives, attack the problems differently. It's how we come up with the right solutions to actually meet the challenge. So there are great programs in digital forensics, but you can instead go an engineering route or go a computer science route or even go a policing route and still wind up in this field and be able to contribute from a different perspective. That's a great question.
And the answer you provided is very reflective on how cybersecurity is as a whole, right? There's the message that we want to convey with these conversations is exactly what you just said. There are so many different things in cyber that you can do. You know, you can come from law enforcement. I know a couple people who came from law enforcement. I recently met someone who worked as a nurse who's
I have
transitioning into cyber.
I have multiple people who have moved from other professions on my team, including someone from healthcare. And I actually think sometimes those perspectives are really important. In digital
Yeah,
forensics, we're dealing with the way people act and their patterns of life,
yeah.
right? And sometimes victims and sometimes nefarious actors. And actually, people from the healthcare profession have a couple of really interesting skill sets when it comes to digital forensics and cyber. They're used to dealing with folks in emergency situations, and in both digital forensics and incident response, something we have to remember when we're geeking out over data is that our customers or our victims or our suspects are all dealing with the worst days in their life. Or the company was just hit, people may lose their jobs. Someone's freedom's on the line. Somebody's kid is missing. I've worked hostage cases. Everything that we do is somebody else's worst day, and we have a severe responsibility and duty to do the most with that. And sometimes folks who come from other professions, having been on the care side or emergency response, those skills that they have bring an extra element of professionalism that's pertinent to the work we do. But also, everyone's little bit of life experience is so critical. Diversity of teams, diversity of culture, diversity of background, diversity of gender, diversity of experience is really important, because at the end of the day, the people who created the data we're looking at are humans with human behavior. And a lot of times we're trying to solve those puzzles. So whereas we're not practitioners of health or mental science or anything else, we do have to think about user behavior and recognize, is this behavior typical human behavior, or is it an anomaly which needs further
Yeah,
investigation?
yeah.
And because of that, having diverse folks working together with diverse backgrounds, professionally, educationally, culturally, um, is imperative to being able to provide justice and truth.
That is wonderful. I could not have phrased it better because we always talk about, we need more people, we need more diversity, but we never really get into the proper explanation of why we need diversity. Yes, there are people, if you have a group of 10 people, having someone from, a different cultural background, having someone from a different professional background will help, but in what way? So what you just said is wonderful.
Thanks, Conti. Really, it's just that we ask different questions and we see things differently. And when you're trying to solve puzzles, sometimes the questions you ask of the data are more important, because sometimes we misinterpret data, right? Because
Yeah.
we're human. And every human comes with a set of human bias based on our personal lived experience and our
Hmm.
educational experience and
Yeah,
our previous case experience. So sometimes
exactly.
the most important things to overcoming that bias, I mean, we're a scientific industry, so we follow standards and best practices. We challenge those standards and best practices to continually improve them. And more importantly, we do peer review, just like you do in academic publishing. I don't put out a case report without sending it to another qualified examiner on my team to review it and ask me questions and poke holes in my analysis so I can go back and make it better. And it just makes us all smarter, better, and more creative thinkers.
That is correct. So I'm going to move on to my next question then. What are some key skills or some key techniques that you use in your, day-to-day work as a forensics examiner?
That's a really great pattern. I think I'd say pattern analysis. I do a lot of looking at either big picture patterns or even finite patterns. So sometimes that's in hexadecimal. If you've never seen hexadecimal, that's what computer data looks like when we expose it. Sometimes it's in binary. Sometimes we're doing a lot of translation of that data from the way it's stored on a computer. So a lot of that. So there is some math, but it's not algebra and trigonometry. It's more pattern recognition. Being very computer literate is really important because we need to know how these devices interact in order to look at them. I would say coding background is really critical. Device data is written because applications are coded. So understanding how to script or code in a language like Python, really critical skill to understanding. And then really that investigative mindset. And I'd say if you're got that investigative mindset plus the taking some time to learn something like Python or another coding, it's about how the brain works. It's less about which language, if that makes sense. And then really getting that skill of being able to do pattern recognition. Those three things are what makes a good examiner and the skills you need.
Yeah. And that pattern recognition goes back to your curiosity, to your curious nature to figure something out.
And you also have to have that tenacity to go, sure, that's what
Oh,
the
yeah.
tool says it is, but what is it really? Or what am I
Yeah.
not seeing? Right? You've got to be, it's the curious mindset is probably hands and above the most important part. And it's the part that it's harder to teach in the classroom.
Yeah. So, then if you're able to, can you tell us about an interesting or a challenging case that you've worked on in digital forensics and the way that you approached it?
You know, I'm going to tell you about the least technical case I ever worked. I
Okay.
can't say what the case was about. So almost this is the weird thing about being an examiner. Almost every
Yeah.
case you work, if you're working in, I've worked in a corporate environment, you're NDA, you have a non-disclosure agreement, you can't say anything. And I
Yeah.
spent a lot of time in the intelligence community and the military. I can't speak about any of those cases. Um, and I have some like cases right now, but they haven't gone to trial yet, so I can't speak about those, right? So it's all this. It's
You
really
know.
hard to speak about our cases, but I can speak abstractly about how that curiosity and learning as much as you can lead to something on a non-technical case I work. So I was working a case and we couldn't get into the phone because the SIM card was locked. Now,
Oh,
sometimes things are unusual. Not many people lock their SIM cards, right? It's not a
yeah.
common user action. But
Yeah,
this
you lock your
person had,
phone, you lock
you
your
lock your phone,
device, but
but you
yeah.
can lock a SIM card. And
Hmm.
so, A, we know this person was a little bit more astute on that. But B, if you're locking something that's not normally locked, that's what I like to call a clue. So that means we need to figure it out. Now the problem is if you put the wrong code into a SIM card 3 times, you get what's called a puck lock, and then you have to enter the pin unblocking key. There's no way around it. And the pin unblocking key is only known to the carrier. We couldn't get it from the carrier. And it's written on a frame that the SIM card comes in. You know that you pop it out when you buy the SIM card? So we had this, and I turned to the other folks on the case and I said, did we collect the trash from the scene? And they said, yeah, actually, we did grab the trash from the scene because sometimes the people were out there collecting, pull everything. And I said, can I get permission to go down to the evidence room and go through the trash? And they said, yeah. I put on some gloves and I dug through the trash for 2 hours, memorized the last 4 digits of the SIM card number because I was in the evidence room, not in my lab, and I couldn't like walk around with the evidence. And I found the SIM card frame, the last 4 digits, and I signed it out, brought it up to the lab. It had a pup code written on it. I entered it, and we got the data off, and the smoking gun was there. So it's not always that, oh, I did this fancy hack and I found this 0J
Yeah.
exploit
Yeah.
and I got into the device. I've done a lot of that in my career. Sometimes it's just going, how can I get this data? And in that instance, it was putting on gloves and digging through a bag of trash. So also, nothing's ever beneath you. You do everything, right? To solve the case. And it's just thinking, where else could I get it? Because there's no other way around a puck lock SIM card.
That is so cool. Like sometimes what you just said, you can't follow a straight path. There's
Yes.
no one manual. Sometimes you just absolutely have to think outside the box. You have to approach it from a different way, legal way. Again,
Legal
remember,
way,
legal way,
100%. 100%.
people.
I'd say that's one of the most key things. We, as digital forensics examiners, do, again, forensics implies it's for court. We do
Yeah.
nothing without legal authorization.
And I
100%.
and I think a lot of people don't realize that when they think of cyber, they see all this like very fancy stuff on TV and they just assume some people like to operate outside the bounds of law, but that's not true. If you want to work in forensics, if you want your evidence to be logged against or in support of something, you need to follow everything down to the dot. So,
And that's what, when you testify, that's what that's all about. The other
yeah,
side is not only going to look at how you handled this particular case and making sure that chain of custody was maintained and that
yeah.
the hash values are the same to make sure the integrity of the evidence, and did you follow scientific principles and procedures, but they're also going to check your character and credentials,
Mhm.
right? Because it's
Yeah.
you who are testifying as a subject matter expert.
Yeah. But that is such a cool case. I really enjoy listening to those kinds of things because I'm not a very technical person. Yes, I'm in cyber, but I'm not highly technical. But these things help me see that, not everything is very high technical. There are some things that you can do outside the box that help you get to the solution.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. I think that's a big point people miss. And again, that still goes back to it's that investigative mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. Which actually brings me to my next question. What inspired you to found Hexordia, to provide digital forensics services and training, and particularly as a certified woman-owned small business and service-disabled veteran-owned small business?
Well, I love that question because I would say that the thing that took the most gumption in my career was making the transition. I had a very comfortable job. I was a director for Magnet Forensics, one of the largest forensics companies, and I traveled the world and I got to do research. I got to talk about digital forensics, and I loved my job. But I wanted to do a couple of things. I wanted to challenge myself in a new way. And boy, was starting my own company a large challenge, and dealing with some of the bureaucratic things involved there, which were not in my wheelhouse. Luckily, I have an amazing ops manager who's been with me, an operations director, since the beginning. But really, to be able to do more, there were things I wanted to research that I couldn't do in the confines of what I was doing. I found a gap as an educator in accessible education about digital forensics. It was done with all open source and public tooling, so I wanted to provide that. And I really wanted to be able to bring together the incredible people that I've worked with over my career to also provide the highest quality of services to critical government work in labs. So that's the reason we do those three things. We do research, we put out free tools, we put out lots of blogs and videos and content. We create really accessible, we have free classes, even free on demand classes on our website, and we try to create accessible training because there is no reason that the curious mind with the skills to do this should be prevented from getting into this field because of economic matters. That makes me sad. Or even geographical matters, not having access to institutions where digital forensics happens to be being taught because you are in a different part of the world or part of the country than where that's accessible to you, especially with remote world today. And then again, being able to, you can't be a good instructor and a good researcher if you're not actively doing casework. And that's why I still do casework, right? Like I said, I got a summons yesterday. So doing casework is the only way that we continue to grow. So bringing all those things together allows me to provide even more and do more to make the world a little bit better and a little bit safer. And to me, it's all about finding ways to increase our impact and continuing to help others. And I'm able to, I have interns who grow into full-time roles where I am that have over, we've grown an organization, enabling people to really shine their talents. And so combining all of those things together, it's been the most amazing experience, but it was definitely scary. It definitely was putting myself out there. But I'm going to say one other thing. There's representation matters. And it's one of the reasons that I speak at so many events and conferences, because it is important for people to see other people like them. And that's one of the things I think is so great about CybHER. And I would say the tides have changed. As a teacher, I have more women in my classes. I gave a talk yesterday in DC, in DC Metro, Northern Virginia, about some hacking into iOS devices and parsing unsupported apps. I did this hands-on workshop, and I had more women attendees than men. And it's things like that that on the sub level that warm my heart. I had more people of color in that room. It was just wonderful to see how much the tides have changed, because my first job when I worked at TDAP, there were 70 engineers when I started there, and I was the only woman. So man, have those tides changed. I know plenty of other women business owners in our space, great entrepreneurs, people like Amber Schroeder and Amy Moles, and other female entrepreneurs who are running digital forensics companies. And it is just, Williams, there's so many great women out there doing great work, and it matters. So the other thing is if not me, then how would other people know that it could be them?
I love the last statement that you made. That's one of the, I want to say, a philosophy that we follow at CybHER. If she can see it, she can be it. And that's something that is so underrated when it comes to explaining, or when it comes to showcasing all the incredible talent that we have in cybersecurity, especially with female professionals. And what you said about, being one woman in a room full of 70 engineers, that's changing,
It has changed. That
slowly
was 15
changing.
years ago, right? But
Yeah,
I don't see that anymore in labs, right?
I know
I don't see
exactly.
that anymore at the conferences I go to and speak at. I now see a much larger representation of a variety of people from different backgrounds, different everything. And that is wonderful because, again, it's going to make our work in science better because different
Yeah.
perspectives.
Exactly. And that is what we need as well. Again, it goes back to that diversity again, right? We need people who can think differently. If you have a room full of, 15 people who are all thinking the same way, and they're all banging their heads because they can't find a solution, then that's not going to work in the long term. You need someone who can think outside of that scope and what they can bring to the table and a potential solution.
Conti, I did a talk a couple of years ago called Think Differently. So it was the DFIR. So it was like, and the whole idea was about this mental mindset and how we have to approach problems differently. And so I love that you said that. We can put a little deeper twist on that.
I love that title. I love that title. Which kind of brings me to my, well, actually doesn't, but since we're running out of time, I have two more questions I wanted to ask you. Um, what does your typical day at work look like?
It's varied. It depends what I'm doing. It could be going out and seizing evidence, or it could be I'm sitting in front of my computer all day. It could be I'm in my Faraday box there that protects signals with a device. I could be creating test data, which could mean I'm driving around. I could be getting on a plane to go to a client site or to go help with a problem. So really, my days are so varied, which I love. So sometimes I'm just staring at a computer screen and staring at hex. Sometimes I'm writing a report. Sometimes I'm briefing. So I'm providing, I've briefed everything from lots of attorneys, but also general CEOs of companies. I'm explaining to them about their worst day, right? And about what the truth of the data is. So my day, I spend a lot of time collaborating with others. Part of my day is also often reading research papers and I do a lot of searches on Google Scholar. I do a lot of reading of what my Sunday mornings are pretty consistent. This week in Forensics is a blog site that every Sunday morning in the US, because the author is in Australia, in Sydney, he puts out everything that the communities put out in a week. It's usually about 200 articles. So my Sunday mornings, I usually sit down with my cup of tea and I go through all of the new research, malware, incidents, everything that's happening in the community, the new tools. And a lot of times I'm testing new tools that are coming out and updates. So yeah, my days vary depending on my casework and what's going on.
That is so cool. Can you tell us the name of that blog again?
Sure, it's this week in 4 and 6. So THISWEEK 4, the number 4, the letter N, and then the number 6. And that's by Phil Moore.
Oh, okay.
He's been doing it
I
for eight
believe I
years.
found it.
And so you actually want to know what's cool? I actually go to that site. I was saying I use Google Scholar. I actually go into a page on that site and then use that search bar to find all of the articles that have been put out about that aren't scholarly articles. So it helps me get all
Wow,
the data from other people's blogs.
this is fantastic. I'm actually looking at week 12, which was just this week.
Yeah.
That's a lot of articles. Oh, this
So
is
it's
so
about
cool.
200 things a week the community puts out and shares.
Thank you so much for this. I'm pretty sure many of our viewers, as well as me, I'm going to definitely check it out.
Awesome. Awesome.
Um, so that only leaves us with time for one last question, which is what advice do you have for all the young people that are watching this video?
Be curious. Play with your own data. There are a lot of free sources out there. DFIR Diva is one. Cyber 5W that have a lot of free is another that have a lot of free intro content about digital forensics. Cyber 5W has all these short independent classes, and a lot of the intro ones are free. Do them. Start all free and open source tooling. Download the tools and play. Create your own data. Create your own file sets, create VMs, and use these things to teach you how. All of these free classes will teach you how if you're curious. So be curious about being curious. Go start doing these small classes to get used to it. Start playing with the tools and just play with data. Play with data. Play with your own data too. Create your own test data. Create pictures. Modify them. Take a live motion photo on your Android phone. Send it out, and then carve out. You'll get a picture, a JPEG, and then carve out the video from it. Right? Like do those kinds of things that get your curiosity going. That get you actually playing with the data. And you can do it with your own stuff, and you can do it with all free tools.
Thank
Nothing
you. That
stopping you.
was nothing stopping you. I love that advice. Thank you. So, for all of you watching this recording right now, Jessica Hyde is going to be one of the instructors for digital forensics at our Gen Cyber Girls Camp 2024. So if you're one of the campers, you will have a chance to meet with Jessica and learn from her when she's here in June.
So
So
excited for
Jessica,
that.
we are so excited. I can't tell you because in the past few years, whenever we've done digital forensics, we've had multiple, different folks come on. Amber was here a couple years ago as well. And it's a great way for, all the young minds to learn that nothing you put out there on the internet ever goes away. So, yeah.
It,
So
yeah,
this is
we've got some
perfect.
fun labs for everybody who's going to be fortunate enough to be there. They'll get to play with data. It'll be fun. Mobile data, phone data, iOS and Android. It'll be so much fun.
Oh, perfect. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be part of our cyber conversations. We really, really appreciate it.